field that just wanders. The Earth's magnetic field is much more stable, and it seems to therefore be a permanent magnetic field. So the only way it's changing is the way it is there are crustal displacements happening on Earth, small ones. And the only way we could have these crustal displacements is if the Earth has actually captured a new moon. Because these are always in the same direction. It's not just an object going by the Earth here and there. It seems to be an object in a regular orbit. And this orbit seems to be quite elliptical, so when it's at perihelion, at the closest position to the Earth, this is when these crustal displacements are occurring. And it would lead to tidal events at the same time, which we know we are having as well.
Wow.
Yeah.
Now, Scott, this ties into your research. Now, I know I haven't probably given the two of you good background. So, Claudia, let's start with you. Mm-hmm. Your background, you are a PhD in theoretical physics, correct?
That's correct.
And Jennifer wanted me to ask you specifically, you are originally from South Africa, correct?
Well, that's where I lived for many, many years. I was actually born in a little African country called Mozambique. At the time that
I did not know that.
Yes, at the time it was a Portuguese colony. And my parents were, of course, Portuguese, so I'm Portuguese. But that's where I was born. And when I was there, there was a revolution when I was very young, and I had to leave when I was 9. So I ended up settling in South Africa. At least my parents did. So I did as well. And I just stayed there until last year when I came to the United States. And I never intended to leave. I was quite happy with my lecturing, my job lecturing at the University of the Witwatersrand. But I started researching things that are basically taboo. Physicists are not supposed to research these things or actually write about them and tell the public about them. So when I started doing that, of course, that was the end of my career. So I was basically forced to leave as a result. Yeah, I was basically threatened, victimized. The university was threatened because of what I was writing. And
was this all because of the Planet X subject?
It was indeed, because I started looking. I used to go for walks in the evening, just before sunset, and I started observing the sky, and I knew what I was seeing was not normal. And don't forget that the first course I taught at university was a course on geometric optics. So I knew a lot about what light was supposed to do, how the Earth's atmosphere works, how the blue light in the sky, why the sky is blue, why the sun is. I used to teach this. I knew color theory like the back of my hand. And when I looked at the sky, I knew this is not possible. This is not the sun producing these colors in the sky at sunset. It cannot be the sun. There has to be another star that's following the sun, that after the sun is setting, this star is illuminating the atmosphere.
Well, this would be almost considered, I'm sorry, continue.
No, please, you go ahead.
Well, no, this would be tantamount to heresy. And
that's right.
Yeah, you were committing heresy.
All the theories I started researching that, and I went into a whole lot of other physics phenomena. And I've discovered that there are certain subjects that are absolutely taboo, not because they're not true. They are taboo because they are true, and the establishment, the physics establishment, the astronomy, the astrophysicists do not allow their colleagues to go into that. And anybody that does, their careers are destroyed. And I'm not the first one to whom this has happened. Some of the people, I think one Schumacher who discovered was part of the discovery of the Schumacher. Yes, I believe he was killed. Dr. Harrington was killed. Yeah. James McCanney, I've just written his book. He was also forced out of his lecturing position because he was considering electric fields in how the solar system works, which of course he was right. And he was discovering that comets were not snowballs. They were electrical objects interacting in the solar system because the sun is an electrical object. So when he started writing about that, he was basically fired from his job, stopped from researching. And even though he pays his way to go to conferences, they shut the door on him. They never let him speak, even though most of the data that comes in actually agrees with what is written and what is predicted concerning comets.
You know, Claudia, when I hear you talking like this, this is no different than the repression of the Vatican and of Rome, of the Church, keeping the sacred document from the masses. I find this troubling that science, what we deem as, the pillar of man's logic, is so repressive of its own because they think freely. Now,
that's right.
Go ahead, please.
And there was another one, an astronomer that I respect very much. His name is Holton Arp, and he discovered that the redshift that all astronomers and astrophysicists think it's to do with recession velocity, and that shows that the universe is expanding. And they use it to determine distances of galaxies from the Earth. He showed that redshift was nothing to do with recessional velocity. Well, there is a little part of it that may be due to recessional velocity, but most of it is actually intrinsic. And that means that it cannot be used to say that the universe expands. He actually falsified the Big Bang model. But that was another taboo subject. So what happened to him was they blocked him from getting time at the observatories, at the telescopes, and they also wouldn't publish his papers. So he had to self-publish his own books. And so I'm not the only one. This has happened to many, many other people. Any physicist that questions the accepted theory is basically kicked out of the establishment.
This is a travesty.
It is.
So, Scott, you have been a researcher of Planet X for how long? How many years now?
Well, I picked up on it in college in 1991. I had a theology professor that started discussing it one day, and from that point, it intrigued me. But back in 1991, there was very limited information, and as I went through my career, I lost touch with pretty much all of it, all of the information. But back in 2005, I started noticing chemtrailing, and by 2009, I started talking about it on Facebook. by 2010, I guess Facebook had enough of it, and they just terminated my personal Facebook page. And, I started another one, but I kept on, researching these chemtrails. And then I started picking up on some more information that was coming in. Then I started making my own observations using, the SDO and stereo. And I just started using all of the NASA information, anything I could get my hands on. And just like Claudia said, I started noticing things in the sky that just weren't right. And I also noticed the progression of all of this. And in 2016, I just couldn't hold it back anymore, because I already had so much information that I had dug up. I thought it was time to voice my opinions and show people my observations and dig, because, I have a very analytical mind. When I put my mind to something, it just goes straight forward, nonstop, 100 miles an hour. And over the last 2 years, since I started my YouTube channel, we're coming up on 18 million views in less than 2 years. And my YouTube channel, I've felt the censorship situation, through YouTube and now Facebook, and now you clearly see social media is literally purging all of their platforms: Twitter, YouTube, and Facebook. And the reason being is, the word is spreading. People are waking up. People are seeing the very, very critical Earth changes. And we really do have critical Earth changes, and it doesn't have anything to do with global warming. Now, even though our statistics are showing that the Earth is heating up, they're not giving you the true reasons why. And, over the last 2 years, my YouTube channel, Planet X News, and with the help of Dr. Albers, we have made probably the best observations and shown everyone around the world that listens to us, we've shown them the observational evidence, clear as a bell. And, one way that I know that we are on track is because of how people come after us. The trolling operations, the defamation and slander campaigns, that wouldn't be done consistently on a daily basis for the last 2 years, every single day, if we were just, blowing smoke. The observational evidence is there. It is there. And, both Dr. Albers and I, we've both learned a lot over the past 9 months. And we've also shown absolute 100% proof that there is a small star system that is now orbiting our sun. This system probably came in over, it could be over a century. We really don't know. I mean, Dr. Albers has theorized on some of it, but, the actual concrete proof, we will probably never know. But the fact of the matter is, NASA and the World Space Agencies, they've been putting up these satellites going all the way back to IRAS, the infrared telescope spacecraft that was sent up. They sent it in a very specific part of space. And a lot of people don't understand. They say, oh, well, if it's out there and it's orbiting the sun, then I should be able to see it with my telescope. But that's the same as taking a drinking straw and going outside and holding that up to your eye. That's all you're going to see is that little diameter of your drinking straw. So no matter how big a telescope is, it's the same. And we know that they're covering this up. But the fact of the matter is, we have captured this large object, which is, it's about 3 to 5 times the size of Jupiter. The sun has captured it now. It is in approximately about a 27 to 28 day orbit around the sun. As the sun rotates, it's literally rotating with the sun. And whenever it does get close to the sun in its orbit, we see the sun react with the massive coronal holes and the coronal mass ejections. You know, just before we went on the air, we were looking at a coronal mass ejection that occurred late on the 25th. And we were watching an object coming in from the left limb of the sun. You know, the opposition and debunkers are claiming that it's Mars. But if you watched our live stream from last night, this object appears. We have very good visualization on it. It's striped like Jupiter, and it's massive. So therefore, it cannot be Mars. It's headed directly towards the sun. The sun is reacting as it's moving in. And right now, we just got the updated feed from stereo showing this object continuing to move in closer to the sun, and the coronal mass ejection occurred. So,
which would be the natural response of the sun.
Exactly. Yeah. And this object is making plasma connections with the sun. You know, and Dr. Albers has, you know, theorized and pretty much proven that this object is rejuvenating. I mean, it is the core of a star, probably one of the oldest objects in our universe. Billions of years old, maybe even trillions of years old. Who knows? We may never know.
Yeah.
But the fact of the matter is, it's here. It's here to stay. We will probably never see its exodus in our lifetimes, but it is wreaking havoc on the sun. It does have a very strong magnetic field. That magnetic field can possibly be interacting with the Earth's magnetic field at times. It could possibly be weakening our magnetic field even more than it is already. And all of the signs are there, Wayne. Every single one of them. Going down to the earthquake activity, the volcanic activity. And as I've been preaching to all of my subscribers, followers, and listeners, I've been warning them about the weather conditions, how drastically they will change. And the proof is right outside your door, in your weather. And it's occurring.
Yeah.
And it's about to get worse. And mark my words as I say this today. This spring, the spring solstice in the northern hemisphere, people around the world in the northern hemisphere are going to see complete climate chaos for the rest of their lives from this point on. And, you know, I mean, there's really nothing we can do about it. We have to live with it. We have to adjust our lives to it. We have to educate ourselves about it. And we have to deal with it. You know, and Dr. Albers does a fantastic job of explaining a lot of this deep scientific information to all of our followers. And that, I think, is very critical. Because the more you know, the better off you're going to be. You know, and that's our philosophy, and that's our main goal.
Well, I think we begin to look at the evidence that we're seeing. I mean, talk to the people in Saudi Arabia from what happened to them on Saturday, that
exactly
they're reliving the day after the weather, disaster movie of 2012. So, Dr. Albers, Scott brought up this term stellar core. Let's talk about this, because I want to approach this subject because you two have really paid a price. I mean, both of your lives have been threatened. Your careers have obviously paid a tremendous price, because most people don't realize to be a tenure professor is the accumulation of decades of work.
Yes, well, I was very happy with what I was doing. I enjoyed lecturing. I enjoyed my students, but basically I was forced to leave. I mean, Scott has helped me a lot. I'm here because of him, and he's helped me.
Yeah, I'm sure people want to know the background story on that, but I thought we'll just keep science.
That's right.
God comes to rescue, and that's a tremendous statement, I think, of the character of the individual.
That's right. Yeah.
So let's talk about stellar cores. What are they? What's the influence that they have as they pass through galaxies? And is this part of the problem of what we're seeing with our sun and the rest of the solar system?
That's right. So what we have come in is these old stars. They're not young, they're old stars. And so when they come into the solar system, they're not emitting visible light, so we cannot see them. But they are attracted to the sun. They come up to the sun, and they stay around the sun. They are behaving like atoms in a nucleus. They are attracted to the energy in the sun, and they are sapping the sun's energy, absorbing it, and doing what I call rejuvenating. That is, they regain the ability to emit light once again, because this is the way we differentiate between planets and stars. Stars are celestial objects that are able to emit radiation, a strong amount of radiation. And these objects usually have, in a way, they are similar to planets in that they have these atmospheres, and they have turbulent flow in the atmosphere, and that creates severe storms. Storms are electrical in nature. And then they also have lightning in the atmospheres, but it's much more powerful than lightning in the small planets like Earth. And these lightning discharges cause and allow fusion reactions. Fusion is not occurring in the center of the solar, it's occurring in the atmosphere. The sun is not the only star in the solar system. Jupiter is a star as well, so is Saturn. They both have these lightning discharges in the atmosphere, and all three of them have fusion going on in their atmospheres. So the sun is fusing hydrogen into helium, and from what I've seen, it's possible that Jupiter is fusing sulfur into something else instead of hydrogen. That maybe doesn't have enough hydrogen, I am not sure. But they are also producing, they're kicking out of the atmospheres these positive ions that come out of these fusion reactions and the ionization that is occurring, and then they're forming nebula clouds around them. The sun produces one that's far out at the edge of the solar system, so beyond the orbit of Pluto, and then it's got inner rings, just like Saturn. Saturn has rings around it, and the sun has rings around it, but they're much larger than Saturn's because the sun is a much larger star. But these are all acting like stars. Now, these objects that come in are stars as well, but they are old and they've lost their energy and their fuel, and they come to the sun and they start replenishing. A lot of them, we can actually see the core itself. It's a solid surface, and we can see the material clinging to that core actually starts being shed as it just hovers in the sun's corona, absorbing energy from the sun. And eventually, after being there for a while, and some of them will go in and out, they will stay for a few hours anchored to the sun. There's actually a root that we see. And I believe that's the current. There's an electric current and there's an ion current, and it's absorbing these materials from the sun, replenishing its own atmosphere so that eventually it can give off light again. So this is what these stellar cores are. They're actually old stars. And I think it's possible that the sun has had this happen before, because even Neptune produces more radiation than it should be getting from the sun. And that may show that it's a star as well, also having these discharges in its atmosphere, and also fusing some elements, producing its own nebula cloud around it, possibly a thin ring. And so the sun most likely in the last few million years has been invaded or has captured other stars, just smaller ones. And so that's what these stellar cores are. But this time there seems to be so many of them, because I've actually written an article detailing all of them. They come in different sizes. Some are about 3 times the size of Jupiter. There are some that are just 4 times larger than the Earth. But there are quite a few. We don't just have 1 or 2. And there are quite a few of them that seem to be about Earth-sized even. So
where do they come from?
The thing is, they must come from outside the solar system, from somewhere else in the galaxy. And when I started looking at these objects, I call them brown dwarfs. Now, it's well known that our galaxy is full of brown dwarfs.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And the establishment believes that all brown dwarfs are actually stars that were small to start off with. Now, it is possible that some of stars are formed small, but the brown dwarfs that I've been observing do not seem to indicate that they are working properly as stars. Because don't forget, we have Jupiter, that is a small star. And Jupiter hasn't come right up to the sun and stayed in the sun's corona. Jupiter is in its own orbit. And so these stars, the fact that they come to the sun shows that they are attracted to the sun's energy. And they have come to replenish their own energy in the sun. And this shows that they have aged. They have lost their energy and their ability, and they can come to the sun to replenish it. So these brown dwarfs have lost the ability to emit light, and they are all over the galaxy, I believe. They are difficult to detect. And I think the whole galaxy is full of objects that we don't know are there. Also, we cannot forget that the sun is moving through the galaxy. It's encountering new terrain, new places in the galaxy. And so it's encountering new objects, systems. And some of these systems are coming in towards the sun.
Well, when you were talking about the dynamics of Jupiter and Saturn, I was just thinking about Venus. I mean, Venus is not anything like a planet.
Yes, I believe that Venus is actually a newly formed planet in the solar system. And the way planets form in the solar system is from comets. And comets are not as dirty snowballs, like the establishment likes to call them. And they are actually like asteroids. They are rocks. And when they come into the solar system, they have their own potential, which is different from the potential created by the sun. So the moment they come into the solar system reacts to their presence and sends current towards them. Electrons from the sun and positive ions come in from the outer nebula clouds towards it. And that forms the tail and the coma. So each time these comets come through the solar system, they gather more material through their tail, and they grow in size. And also, their orbit is initially extremely elliptical, but each time they come in, it becomes less elliptical. And the comet grows and grows in size until it gets to the point where it's large enough that with going into the inner solar system, it gets very hot as well, starts to melt, and then it self-gravitates into a spherical object. And then eventually it becomes planet-sized. And when it does, it can damage other planets if it encounters them, and I believe that that's what happened with Venus. And it encountered Mars first, and Venus, as you know, is larger than Mars. So what happens is they electrically connect first. There will be these electrical discharges between planets, then they connect electrically, and then gravity takes over. And the larger of the objects will collect whatever it can from the atmosphere of the other, according to how long it is connected, because they're both moving. And what happened to Mars is it lost its oceans and most of its atmosphere. And we know this, and we know that this was recent, because if we look at images of Mars, we can see where the oceans were. We can see ocean basins. We can see ridges, ocean ridges, where just it goes, the altitude goes down in relation to the land masses, and we can see river basins as well, meandering rivers, but empty of water. And this had to happen not so long ago, because otherwise these storms, these winds and sandstorms that Mars has, would have gotten rid of all these. There would have been erosion, and we wouldn't see any of these little details. But the fact that they are still there shows us that this did not happen very long ago. And we also know that Earth at that time had a catastrophic event happen, and it had to do with a flood. Now, what we know is that comets take hydrogen and oxygen from the nebula cloud and combine it with electrons that are coming in from the sun, and they combine these to form water. So you will get large amounts of water in the tail, and maybe large amounts even in the coma, this dense cloud that forms around the nucleus of the comet, which is a developing atmosphere for the developing planet. So it seems that Venus may therefore have been that comet that pulled Mars oceans off its surface, and then it may have come past Earth. But Venus is just a little smaller than Earth. So in this case, gravitationally, Earth would have won the war. So Earth pulled the water off the comet, and it would have gone into the atmosphere and then fall down as torrential rain on the surface and cause a worldwide flood. So this is a strong possibility, and this, as we know from what we see on Mars, only happened a few thousand years ago. So, and as we know, Venus is a very hot planet. It's very active volcanically. And this is what we would expect out of a newly formed planet, because the comet would have gotten extremely hot as it went through the solar system, and then as it settled into a circular orbit, like it does at the end of its development, then it would still be very hot and take thousands and thousands of years to cool down until eventually some of its atmosphere is cool enough to condense into oceans.
So, as I'm hearing the timeline on this, Scott, this then would tie into the Nibiru story of a planet or something passing through the heavens and man witnessing this crossing.
Mm-hmm.
Excuse me. You know, I've researched. Excuse me. I've researched the Nibiru theory, and I researched it heavily, and I've read all of Zecharia Sitchin's information. I've read all of the information pertaining to Dr. Robert Harrington. And you know, everybody clearly knows that Dr. Harrington died suspiciously of esophageal cancer, even though the man was in perfect health, never smoked a cigarette in his life. He was constantly examined by naval doctors for physicals. And I found out, you know, about 9 months ago that he did not die here in the United States.
Oh, he did not?
No, he did not. He died in New Zealand right after making his observations with his telescope that he built. And, you know, he informed the government because he was the chief naval astronomer.
Mm-hmm.
I found some very, very, very old videotape. It was interviews that were conducted by a British reporter and news investigator. And Dr. Harrington was becoming a little vocal about some of this information that was coming back. And back then, you know, they didn't have floppy disks. They didn't have, you know, CDs or DVDs. They had magnetic tape, reels. And with all of the data that was coming in, it would have taken years and years and years to go over this. At the point in time, right before his death, there was 66,000 miles of magnetic reel tape with all of this data on it. In the interview with this British news reporter, he said to her, it will take years and years to go through this data, but we know this object exists. The perturbations on the other planets is what was leading him to believe that there was another object or system out there that was causing that was causing issues with the outer planets. And as this object was coming in, you know, it was causing issues with Pluto, with Neptune, Uranus, Saturn, Jupiter. Every single planet had documented changes, and he was documenting these changes. But he knew that the clearest spot on the face of this earth that he could go to make these observations in the far southern hemisphere was New Zealand. And that's where he went. He built a custom telescope himself. And he went there. And he was there for, you know, quite a long time, making these observations. I found out through some very, very reliable sources within his own family, because, you know, he had a couple of daughters that are, you know, grown adults now, you know, much older than us. And he was spending a lot of time in New Zealand, and he was making these observations with this telescope. And then he found something. And he was calling home, you know, back to his wife every day. And we found out that his phone, his home telephone, you know, at his house was being tapped. The powers that be were listening in. And I guess I guess he was so scared at what he saw on that day, that big day, that he actually saw this star cluster. And that's what he saw. He saw a cluster of stars with a center nucleus, meaning a much larger object and other smaller objects around it. So you really couldn't say that that is the Nemesis system or Nibiru, because there is no definitive concrete evidence of that. But what he did find was he found a star system that was moving in to our solar system, and the approximation time limit would be about 50 years. He telephoned his wife before calling his information in to the government. And during that phone conversation with his wife, he was scared for the first time in his life as an astronomer at what he was seeing. The next day, he was dead. In New Zealand. He did not die in the United States. He died suddenly of this supposed esophageal cancer in New Zealand. There was no information ever written about him. The U.S. Naval Observatory, hush hush, shut it all down, sealed all documents as top secret, confidential within the U.S. government, never to be seen again. And that is all fact. It's not a story. It's all fact. That man.
So where does this leave us today?
Well, that leaves us today where this system was coming in. And that's what he saw. And he probably only saw, you know, small little, probably little dots that were, you know, that was part of his observation. But with his observations, that now put the secrecy factor on top level with the United States government and NASA. And that is the point when NASA became really influenced and taken over by the United States government. And I bet a lot of people don't know that during this time, a leading member and the head of the CIA was now appointed the head of NASA. So when Dr. Albers tells everybody that this is the biggest cover-up in world history, she's not lying. I mean, this goes beyond JFK. This goes beyond anything. Because they knew, as their observations, as they started making observations on their own based on Harrington's information, they started formulating bigger satellites, bigger craft to go out there. Way out there. I mean, the New Horizons spacecraft that went all the way out to Pluto. There was an interview with one of the leading NASA personnel in charge of that project. And they stated, oh, we made a miscalculation in our fuel and battery life. We can now go past Pluto and see what's out there. Come on. When does NASA make miscalculations on fuel and battery life? Okay? You're talking about the leading mathematicians and scientists in the freaking world. The last thing they're going to do is make a miscalculation like that. They knew exactly what they were doing. And they've been following it for the longest time. And just like some of the older stories go, you know, that time has gone to pass. And here we are. So it's no longer about the mythological Nibiru theory or story. It is about what is here now. And this object obviously has a very intense magnetic field because it interacted with every single planet in our solar system, and it heated up each planet. All of the observations, all of the science, all of the astronomers on the face of this planet will admit every planet went through drastic changes, but they won't tell you why.
Well, we see that in all of them right now. They seem to be heating up.
Exactly. And we don't really know the extent or the reach of this object's magnetic field. See, that's a key. That's a problem. Because if we knew the extent and the reach of its magnetic field, you know, it would help us out quite a bit. But we don't actually know. And, you know, if you take two magnets, one being the sun and much larger, and this, you know, this smaller stellar core, like I said, they're like two magnets with two very powerful magnetic fields. What do you think is going to happen to the stellar core? The sun is going to draw it in. And that's exactly what has happened. And people around the world, some understand it and will accept it and believe in the observations. And then there are others that just don't get it. And then there's the others that are trying to cover it up. But what are you really going to cover up? The bottom line is, it's there, it's here to stay. We're never going to see the exodus of this object in our lifetime. We're going to have to deal with the interactions of this object with our sun. Our sun affects our planet. The magnetic field of this object is affecting our planet. There is absolutely no doubt about it. And the
I get the idea that the Earth...
They're going to be very drastic times that we're going to go through.
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, I was just going to point out the analogy is that I'm seeing the Earth like being in the inside of an MRI machine.
Exactly.
Dr. Albers, when we talk about magnetic stress forces, I don't think a lot of people understand that. I think they got this idea that they've seen the movies where they have, you know, this fake gravitational wave. But let's get to what we do know in the science that we understand, that if you're dealing with a star cluster coming in, and listen, I think it's very feasible. I think it happens all the time. The magnetic fields that these systems would generate would wreak havoc on a solar system, any solar system?
Yeah, the first thing that happens is a magnetic field induces other magnetic fields, and through these induced magnetic fields, it induces currents. So what we have is when we have an object with a magnetic field coming close to our planet, it will induce currents in the ionosphere and inside the Earth. And in that way, it will heat up the interior of the Earth and the atmosphere. But when the interior of our planet heats up, and the currents will also produce earthquakes. Earthquakes are electrical in nature. So it will fracture the Earth. We'll get more volcanic eruptions. Now, if we have our oceans are littered with volcanoes. So when we have large amounts of volcanic eruptions happening on our ocean floors, then the whole ocean starts warming up. And this is what's actually happening to our planet. It's warming up from the bottom due to the interaction between the Earth and these objects. And of course, they are impacting our sun as well. So we get an interaction secondhand. That way, they impact the Earth directly, and the sun impacts the Earth because it's been impacted by these objects. So this is what's actually happening. But people ask, how long have these objects been here? And this is one of the things I wanted to know as well. And I believe that the first observation that we had of one of these objects, and by then it had rejuvenated already because it was emitting light, was what happened in Fatima, Portugal in 1917. So that's just over 100 years ago, where a luminous object, but not as bright as the sun, seemed to actually come between the sun and the Earth. And it caused all kinds of effects that people thought were supernatural. But I believe that what they were actually observing was one of these stellar cores, and it had rejuvenated, and it was eclipsing the sun.
Wow.
Yeah. So this means that these objects have been here for a lot longer than anybody thinks. At the time, people we didn't have, I don't think we had infrared telescopes. If we did, they were all on Earth. They wouldn't be able to see our environment all that well because our atmosphere blocks their view. So we wouldn't know that these objects were here. That's possibly when the establishment started finding out that something was happening. And then they started building telescopes, trying to find out what was going on. By the 1960s, I think they knew something was going on. They started sending out telescopes, the Pioneer spacecraft, and so on. They started finding out that possibly some of these objects were here already, and a lot more were coming in. But other things happened. Like in 1850, we started getting noctilucent clouds, and they'd never been seen before. And these clouds, I think, were associated with the presence of these objects in the solar system. That's why I think they may have started coming in about 150 to 160 years ago.
Wow. Well, we've had the hour right here and there. You know, I just want to say this, Scott and Dr. Albers, what you both have brought is a sense of clarity to, I think, a subject that is all too often so misaligned with, well, let's say the conspiracy theories and then the disinformation. And I just want to thank you both for coming on, and it's been a fascinating hour. So thank you both.
Yes, it's a pleasure.
People can get to your YouTube channel, which is Planet X News. Is that right, Scott?
Yes, correct.
Okay, and Claudia, yours is Planet X physicist, right?
That's right. Yes.
Okay, well, I just encourage all of you to go support these two. These are the type of free thinkers and researchers that show that they really are committed to the subject because they have definitely paid a price for it. My name is R Wayne Steiger. I'm on Thursday nights on the Steiger Perspective. I thank you. This has been the Crypto Truth Seekers Hour, and we appreciate you. Please support Artists First Network. It is where the free voice is continued, strong, and loud. Thank you, folks. Be kind to one another.
Take care, Wayne.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Take care,
Okay, we
everybody.
got it.
It was great seeing all of you here once again. This was our live
Scotty,
broadcast on Crypto Truth Seekers. We'll be back on Jennifer's show at least once a month. So make sure you stay tuned. Stay tuned to Planet X News and Dr. Claudia Albers' YouTube channel. And make sure you share all of our videos with your friends and family members, co-workers, anybody that you know. We feel that it's very, very important that people understand what is happening in our solar system, what is happening with our planet, what is happening with our sun. And now, ladies and gentlemen, each and every one of you can clearly see what is happening with our weather. And the weather situations around the world are going to get worse, and they are going to get very severe. And that is something that each and every one of you must pay close attention to. And we'll have more on this weather coming up tomorrow. We've been monitoring some things going on in the North Pole again. The situation is actually getting very, very bad. It's actually very alarming. So we'll be going live sometime tomorrow, and I'll be showing you exactly what is happening up there. You will definitely be very, very interested. So good night, ladies and gentlemen. We will be back first thing tomorrow, and we'll be discussing what's happening up in the Arctic. Take care, folks. Have a good night.